Hi and welcome to another edition of The Game Changer. I'm excited about this one. We've got a guest who many of you will know. He's been on the football scene for many years, an ex-professional footballer, turned coach, and over the last 3, maybe 4 years has been involved with our very own Bangladesh national team. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you Jamie Day. Welcome.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming. Jamie, listen, I'm going to get straight to it because so many questions, so many answers we need from yourself in terms of your journey, and obviously you've been involved in the Bangladesh scene. But let's start with the very beginning. Your journey as a pro footballer. Just give us a bit of background in terms of where it all started for you. Where you were kind of born and raised, and how you got into football, and where the professional scene started for you.
Yeah, so I live in Sidcup, and I started playing Sunday football for St Thomas More and then Long Lane. And during that time, when I was a youngster, you could go to Centre of Excellence, twice a week. And at 9, I was approached by Arsenal if I wanted to go into the Excellence there. And up until 14, did that. Really enjoyed playing Sunday football, district, county was fantastic. And then 14, I went to Lilleshall, which was the national score at the time, for 2 years. So that was moved to Staffordshire and lived away from home for that period of time. Had a fantastic time there. And then at 16, went back to Arsenal and done a year's YTS, and then signed professional forms there. So great times at Arsenal, fantastic club. Wasn't, if I'm honest, good enough to get into the first team at that time. They had some fantastic players, and decided then to move on to Bournemouth, and had 3 years down there as a professional, and then from there went into non-league. Okay,
and your playing career kind of carried on till where? Where did you finish your playing career?
Yeah, so I sort of retired at 30, 35 when I went to Ebbsfleet as player coach, and then at 37, I think 38, I didn't have a job, and went and played for Cray Valley. They was in the Kent League at the time. So, yeah, officially retired at about 38.
Fair enough. So, okay, you're now obviously finished with football. Your next steps are. Was coaching always something that you aspired to do?
Yeah, I always loved coaching. Even when I was a player, I would. Look at what the coaches were doing then, and the sessions that I liked, I would make a note of them, even at a young age, and knew that there was something I wanted to get into doing. So when I went non-league, I sort of decided, right, I need to get my coaching badges now. I made sure that I got them as quickly as I possibly could, knowing that when I finished playing, that was something that I wanted to stay involved with football. I mean, luckily for me, I managed to get a player coaching job at Welling, so I could sort of play and do the coaching as well at the same time.
Okay, and that started in 2009,
yes.
And that's probably your longest stint as player-manager at Welling United. And tell us a bit about that and the successes that you had there.
Yeah, Welling was a fantastic club for me. It was, like you say, it was my first job. I think I was 29 at the time, so still fairly young, but I had a great backroom staff as well, which allowed me to play. But Welling was a club that was a very family-orientated club. It was one that I'd played for before as a player, so I knew everyone at the club, supporters and the owners at the time.
That was Conference South?
Yeah, that was Conference South, and I felt very comfortable there. It was a club that I really enjoyed working for, and I think that was seen in how our performances and how we progressed over the 5 years that I was there. We got in the playoffs 1 year, and then the next year got promoted to the conference. We spent 2 years in the conference and held our own. We didn't get relegated. So it's a fantastic time, and like you say, if I look back, the longest stint that I've had as a manager, and one that probably had the most success out of the clubs that I've been with.
Cool. Right, so we've gone. Following that, you went to Ebbsfleet. You had some time at Green Rovers, Braintree, back to Welling United, and then you got involved as the assistant over at first team coach at Gillingham, and then. Before you started the Bangladesh role, now this is where kind of I guess the real question starts, is you were at Barrow as assistant manager, and then from there comes the Bangladesh role.
Yeah, it was.
How does that happen? And had you ever heard of Bangladesh?
No, it was really out of the blue. So I was assistant at Barrow at the time. I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was an agent in Asia, and he said, look, Bangladesh are looking for a younger coach. The football sort of declined at the minute, and they want to sort of start again. They want someone who's young, got a bit of enthusiasm, that's worked at a lower league. And like I said, I didn't even know who Bangladesh was. I genuinely, I'd never, heard of the country really, if I'm honest, and didn't know what part of the world it was in. But it was a national team job, and involved in that was doing the under-23s. It was a joint role, and that I've always liked working with younger players as well. So I said yeah before I'd even, looked at the country or looked at facilities or anything like that. I was keen to do it because of being an international manager, and I met Nabil, who's on the committee now. He came over to London. We had a chat for a good hour or so, and he explained the situation of football in Bangladesh at the time, and would I want to go over there and try and build a reputation back up and try and get it from, I think there was 198th in the world, and try and get them back up to sort of a reasonable level of FIFA ranking. So yeah, straight away I was caught with it and wanted to do it, but I had to sort of run it by my family first and make sure they was happy. And once we sort of had a chat and we thought, right, for career-wise, we think this is something that's going to benefit me, we agreed it all, and then I think I was over there a week later and was getting ready for the Olympics. Wow.
Okay. So, in terms of expectations, it was very much about just taking them back up the rankings. But from your own expectations of the research you'd done going into it, how much were you aware of what you were letting yourself in for?
Yeah. Obviously, when a job comes up, you look at the players and you look at what's happened previously, and I knew that they had a drop, in the FIFA rankings. They hadn't played for a year. I think they played one game before me, but they'd taken some time out from playing international football, and it seemed to have hit a bit of a low. So in my mind, I was thinking, right, let's look at the players that potentially were still in the national team. Could I take this from 197? Could I see a progression? And I thought I could. So I recognised some of the younger players that had been brought in from the previous coach. He sort of started this process of looking at some younger ones. So I identified them. I looked at some of the older ones that we had. There was Mamoon.
Who was the previous coach? Sorry if you don't mind me. Was he a Bangladeshi coach?
No, he was English Australian. I can't think of his name at the minute.
Okay, no worries. I'm sure we
can find out. But he was there for a year and done one game that time. But what he did do was he recognised some younger players that he'd used. So I went along that route as well. Andrew Ward, actually.
Andrew Ward, okay.
Yeah.
Good shout.
And that was it. So I thought, I brought in an experienced assistant with me who'd worked in Asia before, Stuart Watkis. He was manager in India, so he knew how familiar that would be and knew the process of moving over there. So I thought, it's a challenge, but it's something I'm looking forward to, and I felt that we could achieve moving up the FIFA rankings.
So you'd gone there with obviously minimal knowledge of how the setup works, but in your head, did they have an expectation of the type of football, or did you have an expectation of the type of football you were hoping to play?
Yeah, I think first of all, we went over there, and me and Stuart said, right, we want to try and play attractive football. We want to play out from the back, as most people want to do. But then we also realised before we met the players, right, well, we need to gauge where the players are at first of all, and what's going to work with the players that we have available. So if we can't play out from the back, then we need to find another solution of what we're going to do. So we had these ideas in our head, and first and foremost, we wanted to get them fit, because I'd heard that fitness was not great at times, and they was a bit unorganised. So first and foremost, we thought, right, we're going to look for some younger players, we're going to get them as fit as we possibly can, and we're going to get them organised. We'll then see how that works, and if we can then play a certain way of passing, great. If not, then we'll find another way that fits us to get results. So in the back of our mind was like, well, that's the start process, and then we'll build it up and we'll work on different avenues as we go along.
Okay, so you've gone there, you've had a session. Straight away, on that evening, you chat with your assistant. What's that? How does that go?
Yeah, so we went.
What do you think of the ability levels?
Yeah, we went to BKSB, which was a training facility, and the national team were in training at the time, and they had about 35 players already selected. So me and Stuart just sort of took a step back, did what we was going to say, watched the game, and we watched it, and our first thought was, I think we need to get back on the plane and go back to England. It was a game that no one played in any position. They were running all over the place. The standard wasn't great.
How would you describe the standard at that particular time?
At that particular time, I would have said it would have been real lower league over here. You know, I would say it looked like Kent League standard, probably even a little bit lower than that.
Wow.
So that's like step 7, 8, is it?
Wow, really?
Yeah, and at that time I was a little bit worried. They were a great set of boys. We'd seen them a couple of days, but watching the game, you know, they positioned, they didn't know where they was going. Tactically, they had no idea of where to pass, where to run, and I was worried. But what they did have was they had enthusiasm and a willingness to want to listen and want to learn. So then we thought, well, yeah, if they've got that, then we can work on the other areas. And we knew it would take a bit of time. We had 3 months before the Olympics, so we picked a group of players from that to then work with them players for 3 months for the Olympics.
Okay, so going back to your journey as a coach, at that stage, at what level were you at with your coaching badges?
Yes, I would have been A licensed then.
Okay.
Which again, as people know, it's a long journey to get your badges. But I always wanted to get to A licence, and then if I could go beyond that, then that would have been fantastic. But I wanted to get to A licence, which, as you know, opens up doors coaching-wise and jobs. So that was my main aim at that time, and luckily enough, I sort of managed to do that in a fairly quickish time.
Okay. You've had the conversation with Nabil before, obviously you've been here. You've gone out to Bangladesh. We'll talk about your initial impressions of Bangladesh when you got there. But your conversations with BFF, how regularly did you meet in the first instance when you got there, and what were your first thoughts?
Yeah, so I met Nabil in London. I hadn't met anyone else before that, and then we went over to Bangladesh, and I met the technical director, who was from England at the time and still there now.
What's his name?
Paul Smalley.
Okay.
And obviously the president, I met probably about 2 or 3 weeks after landing in Bangladesh.
All right, so you met him 3 weeks after, and that's Qazi Sheikh
Salahuddin.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Salahuddin, okay.
That's it. And then, as you know, in Bangladesh, they have a lot of committee members. So first and foremost was meeting the main people in that, and that was obviously the president and Nabil. And at the time, they were the main 2 people that I would speak to and discuss the football matters with. And then Shoag come on a little bit later on as General Secretary, and he would be involved in some of the conversations as well.
So from that initial conversation that you had with the president, Qazi Salahuddin, what was his expectation of you going into the Olympics?
Yeah, so going into the Olympics, there was no expectation. They was very good, in fairness. There was no pressure put on me. They said, look, you know, we've not done very well in the past in the Olympics. We've never got out the group stage. You've got some young players. Go and have a look at these young players. We're not expecting you to do anything in the group stage. If I'm honest, it was basically just try and keep the score down to a respectable level and come out with it with a little bit of pride. And for me, that was no worries. I knew where I stood. I didn't know the level of the teams that we were playing against, so that was something that I only experienced once we got there. But I felt that, you know, we had 3 months. We could make us organised and hard to beat, and that was what we planned to do going into the Olympics. But there was never any real pressure for that tournament.
Okay, so you'd gone into the Olympics. The types of teams you're playing at that, for those that are not aware, name some of the countries that you'd be up against.
So in our group we had Uzbekistan, Thailand, and Qatar.
And these are teams that you'd regularly be up against, right?
Yeah. So in the World Cups we've played Qatar. So it was 3 real tough games. And
how did their levels differ to Bangladesh?
Yes, I remember the first game. Obviously, it was the first time I took charge, and the game kicked off, and Uzbekistan got the ball, and they played 3 or 4 passes, and I looked round at the assistant, and I realised the massive gulf in class that we were then playing against. These were technically very good players, and it was an under-23 tournament with 3 overage players. So they had 3 national team players, like we did as well. And a couple of movements and a couple of passes, and probably for the first 5 minutes we didn't touch the ball. And then it sort of hit us that, right, we're miles off, technically, who we're playing against. So, you know, we then made sure that we was difficult to beat, and that sort of process was throughout my time there. But that was the first time I realised of the levels that we were playing against and how far behind we was technically.
Okay, so away from the football, you've never been to Bangladesh, you'd never heard of Bangladesh before. So you land in Bangladesh and you get off at Dhaka airport. What are the first impressions?
Yeah, when the technical director rang me actually and said, look, it's a completely different world over here. So I'm just pre-warning that you're not going to see anything like that you're about to see when you come out. And as I was like, yeah, it's all right, no worries, I'll be fine. And I come out of Dhaka airport and it was the bibbing and the crowded people and the noise, and it just hit you. I didn't realise, you know, the amount of people in Bangladesh, you know, and I'm used to the UK of how things are done. There was cars on the wrong side of the road. It was chaos, is probably the best word I can describe it. And I thought, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. My assistant had been in India, so he said India's similar, but Bangladesh is a lot more chaotic than India. So once we was driving through, and you know, you go through the areas, and there are some sad parts as well when you see children on the side of the road and people sleeping on the side of the road, and I felt guilty first of all, you know, seeing this, and you know, you want to help, but there's so many people that are on, you know, that's on the streets and stuff. But it was difficult first of all, and then you sort of get used to the chaotic side of it, and you know, I say, met loads of really fantastic people out there that I will always keep in contact with and become really good friends with. So yeah, it was a little bit of adjusting to it, and but I think we did adjust to life in Dhaka.
Okay, so in terms of your tenure, how longer periods at any one time would you spend out there?
Yeah, so it changed over the 3 years. So when I first went there, I did 4 months straight off. So that was a long period without seeing my family, and and I think after that 4 months, I went home for 3 or 4 weeks and done another 2 or 3 month stint. So the first year was really tough, and in discussions with my family, we was only going to do a year. It was do 1 year, play some World Cup games or qualifications, Olympics, and then come home.
Yeah.
So the first year was tough. The second year, I was allowed to go home more than the first year. So I would generally do 4 or 5 weeks, and then I'd go home for 2 weeks at a time in the second year. And then obviously the last year with COVID, that sort of had an effect, and it went back to spending 2 and 3 months at a time, because travel and stuff dictated that. So it became a longer process again.
Okay, so we're talking about a lot of speculation. We know, we were talking off air in terms of the appetite in Bangladesh for football versus cricket, but also when you look on the socials, and if you were to read it, you'd think that nothing good ever happened. Even if you won the game, you'd be getting a load of grief, right? So in terms of some of the stuff I used to read looking at the socials was, what exactly did it say on your contract in terms of the time spent there and your role specifically? You know, there's a number of questions within this one question in terms of, you know, how much time were you contracted to stay out there to work with the team? Who picked the team?
Yep.
Was that the federation's role or was that your role?
Yeah.
And then ultimately was basically how much time did you have with the players at any one time?
Yeah, so my contract allowed me to have a certain amount of days in the UK, and I had to fulfil a certain amount of days in Bangladesh. So I never went over them days that I was allowed to take. I think that people probably thought that there's a lot of time spent in the UK, but that was what was agreed with myself and the federation. And obviously after the first year being very tough with the family, I then made it clear that if I was to continue the role, then I needed to spend a bit more time at home in the UK, which, you know, everyone was happy with and agreed with. And then regarding the team, I never had any pressure from anyone to pick other players or players from certain teams. I was never told you've got to pick this player or you have to pick that player.
So you would
so
always
I would
select the squad.
I would announce the squad of 35 players if it was. The only other discussions we had is I didn't feel that we needed to keep calling up 35 players to a squad when we only picked 20. I didn't see the point of us doing that, but that was the only thing that the Federation were keen to do, is they wanted a larger players coming into the squad originally to then be for me to select 20. But I would pick the squad, the team, and the thing that we did do over a period of time was training camps were slightly longer. Before I went out there, it was 2 and 3, 4 weeks at a time, and obviously in the UK we don't do that, or many teams around the world. You get the players 1 or 2 days before the international window. I can see why we did it in Bangladesh, because we probably needed a bit more time to work with them players, but I also felt that at times we had players in for 4 weeks in a camp before we played a game. Now by the 2nd and 3rd week, the players mentally have been in a hotel room on their own, have not seen their families. It becomes tough for them. So we had to find a balance. So we then shortened it down to 10 days before the international window started. I felt that was enough time for us to work with the players. And then that the players were happier that they was spending less time in a hotel room, they get to see their families. So mentally I felt it was better for them as well going into the games. And then we would have them, like I say, 10 or 12 days, and then you go into the international week and play 2 or 3 games within that week.
So selection process for you would be, how often would you go out and look at players playing for their clubs?
Yeah, so I mean, if I go from the last year that I was there, we spent 3 months watching every league game. Most of the league games, because of COVID, were based at the National Stadium. So we made, over the 3 years, we had a list of players that had played for the national team, potential players and younger players. We made lists of what we wanted to do. My first idea when I first went out there was I wanted to pick a group of 24 players that we would work with for 2 years. So regardless of form, we identified these players, and then we would continually work with them players and give them programs and stuff to do. We didn't go down that route. It wasn't a route that the Federation were keen to do. But what we did do is we then had a list of 50 players. So we monitored them 50 players over the 3 months on the last year that I was there, making sure we see everyone 4 or 5 times, and then we would make a decision on who we'd cut from that 50 into the 20 or 25 of squad players picked.
Okay. And in terms of ability levels, from what you saw from when you first started to, let's say, last year, just before COVID hit, how far had you seen?
Yeah, I'd seen a big improvement in the players, physically, mentally, and technically. You know, to them, you know, I feel that probably now, you know, they probably Ryman Premier Conference South sort of level, so they've jumped up quite a bit. They now know, don't always do it, but they now know what to eat. They know what foods are good for them and how they can look after themselves to prepare better. They very rarely went in the gym before we went, and 90% of them now, if you look at their bodies, they have a physique of a footballer. You know, they've got the six-pack, they've got the muscles. We know that majority of the players are going to be 5'7", 5'8". You know, that's we understand that, but I would say that the improvements they made was very big, and that reflected in results. The next stage is then developing facilities and structure to try and get a little bit more out, which we hadn't quite reached. But I can't fault the players for their effort and their enthusiasm to want to do well over the period of time that I was there.
Cool. All right. So we're going to go to a short break, but when we come back, we will continue the discussions with Jamie. And like I say, it's progress, and we want to know more about infrastructure. Jamie just touched on it. We want to learn more about the current situation and hopefully how Bangladesh can maybe improve the facilities and, more importantly, the ability levels over the coming years, and to see, so we can all see some progression moving forward. See you in 2 minutes. Welcome back to the second part of The Game Changer. We're still in conversation with Jamie Day, ex-Bangladesh national coach and manager. So Jamie, we were talking before we went to the break about the standard of football over there. You mentioned that when you first went out there in 2018, the standard you probably describe as step 7, step 8.
Yep.
Towards over the last year, you've noticed an improvement in terms of the fitness levels, the strength, the technical ability, and you'd probably describe it as a Ryman Prem kind of standard right now. But in terms of like the impact, there was a couple of, you worked with a couple foreign Bangladeshi players who'd gone over, the likes of Tariq Kazi and Jamal Bhuiyan, who's probably the most prominent name.
Yeah.
How much of an impact did they have on your setup, and what did they add?
Yeah, I mean, when I first went over, Jamal, was the main focus of the national team. He was raised in Denmark, so he had an academy sort of background over in Denmark playing. So technically, he was the best player that we had. So I knew that with Jamal, he's a great lad. We had to involve him in some of the meetings and involve him in the plans that we wanted to do going forward, because he's going to be a big part of that. And Jamal was very good for me. He helped with some of the players that wasn't in the national team at the time that he played with previously that I'd missed. And Mamoon Islam was another great lad for me. He was an older player.
So he's at Aban. He was Aban player,
yeah, Dhaka Barney. He was one that I spoke to before I took the job, and he was very helpful. And up until recently, he was in the national team with me purely on the fact that his help and technical ability when he was fit was he was probably the best Bangladeshi that I've seen play. And I wish I would have had him when he was 23 or 24.
Right.
Just as when you get to 30, it catches up with you. And but Jamal was our focus. And then towards the end of last year, I felt that we need to look outside of Bangladesh if we wanted to try and go on to the next level. And we recognised Tariq was playing in Finland at the time. We looked just recently at Yusuf in Ipswich. So we was just trying to see what other players potentially we could get to come and play in for Bangladesh that would improve the squad without having to change, the structure and the setup that we had, because it wasn't going to take us any further going down that route. So the other option was to look at players like that we could bring in and improve the squad in a quick fix sort of way.
I really want to get this in, because you mentioned you're a coach, you're a manager, but the reality is you need players who are coming into the international level who are proven players who can already play, because you don't have time to improve them technically in terms of their abilities on the field. So just give us a bit of a flavour to those that are asking and talk about the lack of coaching.
Yeah.
The reality is you've got them for 10 days.
Yeah, it's a long conversation. This could be. The structure at the minute is not like it is in England or Europe, where children are coaching from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, twice a week, 3 times a week. That structure's not quite ready or there in Bangladesh at the minute. And like you said, I would be getting players who are 20, 24, 25, 26. And as a national team coach, my job is not to coach them technically. My job is to get them ready for the game, who we're playing against, how we're going to set up, the strengths and weaknesses. Yes, you have to have a framework of how we want to play, so we will just go over that again. But my job isn't to, I didn't think my job at that time is to teach players to control the ball, look over their shoulder, where to pass it. We tell them how we want to play, and then they've got to execute that. We're still a long way behind in that department, and I've said this many times, I don't blame the players. It's not the players' fault. They've not been coached until a later age, and are still behind on that coaching, system. So that needs to change in Bangladesh. we need to find a way, and we said this many times, is we need to produce better players than we have now in the national team. But the way we're going to have to do that is these kids need to be being coached at 6 and 7 and 8 years of age. And it doesn't have to be serious academy football in 5 times a night, but they need to have facilities available. They need to have coaches available that are going to coach these children with a football. They're going to coach them techniques, and they're going to get them used to playing football at a young age. You know, now I always say this is, right now, a 7-year-old in Bangladesh, what are we doing to make him become a professional footballer? I don't think we're doing enough at the minute. And if we continue down that process, then we're going to have the same results, the same level of players. So we need, I understand it costs. But if you look at other countries, you have to have a plan of 10 years, 5, 10 years, 15 years of, right, this is what we're going to put in place. It's going to take this period of time. So we have to accept it's going to take this period of time because, you know, we're not going to pick up a 16-year-old now and make him into Messi. That's, you know, it's not going to happen. But we need to look at the younger age. We need to give them facilities. We need to have plans in place so that they're getting regular training. So this 7-year-old in 10 years' time steps into Bangladesh national team and he's good enough to play international football against the level of players that we want to play against and compete against.
Okay, and so that begs the question, what's the relationship like and the appetite of integrated work between the federation and the major clubs, let alone the smaller clubs, the clubs in Bangladesh?
Yeah, you know, for me, the structure at the clubs and the facilities at the clubs aren't good enough. It's, you know, some clubs don't even have a training ground and use a park pitch or...
Paddy fields.
Yeah, or, you know, some train at universities, but you could have 3 teams train at university, one after the other. There's not portable goals. You know, there's sometimes not enough bibs, not enough footballs for these club teams. They don't have an under-23 system. So they have younger players that are not in the first team, they don't play. The teams don't have academy system of younger players coming through. So where we're at now, I feel, is that Bashunda Kings are the best club. They're trying to do things correctly. They've got their own training ground. I believe they're setting up academies at younger age groups, and that's something we need to focus on. We do need to, as well, play our younger players. So, you know, we have 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They never play any matches. So they train, but there's no end product. So what we're doing is these young lads are training, and then we're saying to them, right, come and play for the national team now in front of 50,000 people. Well, they've not got the experience of playing on a regular basis. But then they're thrown into a first team at club level. After 3 or 4 games, if they don't perform, they come out.
So what's the solution there?
Well, my solution is, and I've looked at other leagues around the world, is I believe that there should be slightly less foreigners in our league. Not because I don't like foreigners, and I'm a foreign coach myself, so I believe that if you have the right foreigners, they can help the players.
Would you say, is there a cap at the moment?
There's 4 at the minute.
Okay.
I personally would bring that down to 2.
Okay.
I would also put into it that 3 or 4 under-23s have to start in the starting 11, and then you get the other players of any age. I believe that there should be, you know, 3 or 4 under-23s within the squad as being in sub, so that these younger players can also get a taste of playing and being involved in the match day experience, so that they're then learning, you know, and can play under a little bit of pressure, and when there's points at stake and when there's games to be won, they can learn this process. And it is difficult because I understand that not just in Bangladesh, everyone wants to win the league, wants to win the cup, but I think we need to take a step back and look at, right, how can we develop these players? It's not just about winning the league, it's not just about winning the cup. It's about now, can we get and develop younger players into the national team set up at a younger age and into the national team set up at national level and under 23 level, and they need experience to be able to do that.
Okay, interesting. And in terms of overseas players, we had this conversation around UK Bangladeshi football talent. How much of an appetite is there from the current federation setup to allow that to happen for the Bangladesh national team?
Yeah, I think the main The main issues that I've sort of come across is cost of bringing foreign players over to Bangladesh. Obviously, if we select or the Federation selected a player from UK, generally we'd have to cover all the costs of that. And it's difficult to, not so much UK, because I can come over to UK and watch the players, I know the level. So that, for me, it makes it, or it would have made it easier. If there was, for example, a player in Sweden who had a Bangladeshi parent, I wouldn't be able to go and watch him play because we wouldn't have the budget to do that. So then I would be picking a player on not seeing him play live.
Blind. And YouTube versus reality is two different things, right?
That's very difficult, especially when it's a national team and then you're playing against teams that are ranked 100 in the world to say, right, go on then, let's hope that you are good enough because you play in Sweden in Division 3. I don't think you can take that risk.
Because what is the difference? It's not just about the footballing abilities. You've got claiming climate changes, you've got environmental changes that these kids are having to deal with. How much of a factor does that play?
Yeah, it's a huge factor. You know, some players have never left their country to come and be on their own and play for the national team. So, like you say, the climate's different. The facilities are different to what they're used to. They have to adapt to the facilities that we have in Bangladesh. So that's difficult for them as well. The food, it can be a problem as well.
Yeah.
You know, they don't know the players. So there's 5 or 6 factors that you've all got to look at before selecting someone that needs to come from outside into Bangladesh. And then you need to weigh up and think, right, is that, if it's Chowdhury from Leicester, then there's no hesitation. If Premier League player, bang, we'll get on with it. But if it's someone that's playing in a lower league in a lower country, do all them factors give it enough to select that player?
Yeah.
And as we've seen, if they come in and they don't hit the ground running, they get criticised. So then it's unfair on that player to bring him into environment, play in one game. If he doesn't play a 9 or an 8 out of 10, he gets criticised, and then you lose that player because then, you know, it's very difficult to then put him back in again.
Okay. All right, let's move on in terms of your tenure as Bangladesh national team coach and manager. But you know, we're aware of what's happened over the last few months.
Yeah.
Give everybody a bit of a flavour on where you're at and what's your current situation with the Bangladesh national team role.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm still with the Bangladesh Football Federation. At the moment there's no games anyway till next year, so I think I'm aware of the situation, that it's a process now of us reaching probably an agreement of the Federation looking to get a new coach, which, you know, I had spoke about before I come home. So that's the situation we're at. You know, we've been very professional so far, the Federation and myself. We've sort of speak on good terms at the moment. There's no issues. I had a fantastic experience and time there, and I don't want to tarnish that with, you know, not making sure that everything's put in place before we leave. So once that's complete, then I'll obviously start looking and see what other avenues open up for me. I've really enjoyed working with national team. That's something that I would look at doing again. I really enjoyed working abroad. My family might say a little bit different on that, but I did enjoy it. So I think once, you know, this is all complete, and then I can move on and see what else comes up.
Okay, 3 years as Bangladesh national team coach. We don't know what what the future lies. But in terms of your highlights as a coach, what if there was one moment that you would have to pick? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, when I first went there with the Olympics, they'd never got out of the group stage, and we beat Qatar 1-0 to qualify into the last 16. So that was a fantastic achievement for me. I also think we qualified for the World Cup group stage, and that gets a little bit overlooked. But they'd struggled previously to do that, and, you know, to go away to Laos and win 1-0 and to qualify for that group stage, I think, you know, was one of the highs. I think probably India draw in Calcutta was a real big high. I really enjoyed that evening. Shame we couldn't, you know, get 3 points, but there's some. I personally had a real good time with some real highs, and, you know, look back at it with good fondness and feel that there was a lot more highs than there was lows. I think the lows for me obviously was the SAF Championship in 2018, I think it was a 19, where, you know, we played 3 games, we won 2, and lost out on goal difference to get through to the next
remember
round.
that,
And we played really well in them 3 games. Even the game that we lost at the end, you know, it was unfortunate we made a mistake to concede a goal, and that was probably a bit of a low because I felt that we was playing really well at that time and that we deserved to get into the semi-final. And I thought if we did get in the semi-finals, we had a chance of the teams that were left. You know, it was Maldives and India, and India took a younger team out. I watched Maldives, I thought we could beat Maldives, and I felt we had a good chance, and we just, you know, we fell at the final hurdle in the group stage. So that was a low for me, probably the biggest low when I've been 3 years out there.
Okay. Well, from my own personal perspective, listen, I took an interest in Bangladesh, the Bangladesh national, as you know. I contacted you via Twitter, etc. But to have a British, an Englishman managing, you know, my motherland, and I think not just me. I think when you took the role, it actually created an appetite and an interest for football here in the UK as well. So the British-born Bangladeshis now are actually following what's going on over there. And it's, you know, in terms of what you see moving forward, I hate to ask this question, but I think it's something that needs to be asked. I know you've touched on it, but what are the problems that Bangladesh football has in its current setup, and what do you think are the solutions in terms of how it can improve?
Yeah, I think the main problem I see at the minute is the structure at real youth level of getting these young players playing and coached on a regular basis. We have enough coaches in Bangladesh. You know, there's a lot of coaches that have passed A-licence courses, so there are a lot of them available to do that. The league structure needs to be looked at. I think that, you know, personally, I would cut the league down, and I would make sure there's a criteria that the clubs need to fulfil to be able to stay in that league. And if it means that there's only 6 or 8 teams in the league to start with, as long as them clubs are run correctly and professionally, then you can always add to that. I think that, you know, the pitches in Bangladesh are not good enough for the players to play. That's not just national team players, that's every single player that plays in the league.
So what I found, you were saying off air that their league, all games are played on one pitch?
Yeah, so when I first went there, they was all played at the National Stadium, and then they opened it out and branched it out and picked 4 or 5 stadiums around the country, and then COVID come back in and went back to one stadium. So there was a slight progression there because teams then started to have a stadium that was their home ground, and that's something that was a real plus and I think needed to be done. Obviously with the situation now, it's gone back to National Stadium, but the pitches, you know, you'd had 3 games on one day, one after the other, and if you were the second and third game and it's rained, you're playing on, it's impossible to play. So that needs to be looked at. I think there needs to be under 23 league. There needs to be youngsters playing on a regular basis once a week in a league, so that when they are ready to be called upon the first team, they've played games. They're not just sitting there, you know, watching it. And yeah, there is facilities that need to be looked at. You know, especially with the national team, travel arrangements need to be better. And it is a slow process. And I think the BFF are trying to slowly change that. But as we all want in life, people want a quick solution and a quick fix. And I think we, as a footballing nation, got left behind a little bit, you know, when everyone started to bring academies in and they started to change the facilities 10, 15 years ago. We didn't go with that flow, you know, and we're starting that process now. So we're 10, 15 years behind everyone else still, and that's the period that we've got to try and catch up. Okay.
So in terms of your own future, what it holds, should I say, so you're kind of in limbo with the Bangladesh setup, but do you know the reasons as to why that's happened, or you're in the situation that you are right now?
Yeah, I think with the national team, people, I don't think just the federation, I think people in general thought we was very negative in the way we played, and people wanted to see open attacking football. You know, my thoughts and ideas on it is that when you're playing teams that are 6, 7 levels technically better than you are, you can't play open football. You know, you're going to lose 6-7-0. And, you know, tactically people would say, why don't we high press? Why do we press from the halfway line? But we done them for reasons to make us harder to be beaten and to be able to then counter-attack and use our strengths against teams that were better than us. I think it comes to a stage where we had a lot of progression and we, went on a real steep upward curve, and then it sort of plateaued out a little bit, and we just sort of stayed on that same line for a period of time. And I think people within the federation wanted to keep going that way, and I didn't think it was possible to keep going that way unless there was big changes being made. I felt that we'd reached a level that was capable of doing, and probably the peak of that.
What are them big changes that you felt needed to be made?
Yeah, well, it needs to be massive investment. We said about cricket, cricket sponsorships and the money they spend is phenomenal, is millions, and that's not being spent within the football setup. And to do that, we need training facilities that are world class. We need to look after the players correctly when they're travelling. We need to make sure that when they're at their clubs, we're caring for them and that we're giving them the best chance for them to play well. We haven't quite reached that level yet, and until we reach that level, then it's going to be very difficult to increase performances.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. And with regards to, I guess, in the interest of time, what does the future hold for you moving forward? I know you mentioned you've got the appetite for international football, but do you see yourself potentially getting into a role here in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in the UK before. I do like English football. Been a part of it for many years. So it's something that I would definitely look at getting back into if, again, it was something that there was a sort of a job that I thought, this is where I could build the club and take the club forward. I would look at sort of any level, really. League One and League Two would be brilliant for me to get back into, but I have to be realistic as well. So, the club needs to fit me as well, of what I want to do. And if it's a club, like I say, that has a plan and a future, then that's something that I would definitely be interested in. Like I say, for me personally, my family obviously would like me to stay in the UK now. I've spent a lot of time away from them, but I do enjoy also working in other countries and different religions and mentalities, and how people work is something that I really enjoyed in Bangladesh and would consider that again. But yeah, as you know, in football, you sometimes have to wait and you have to be patient and see what comes up. But I'm looking forward to whatever does come up and looking at another exciting journey.
Would you accept a role managing a club in Bangladesh? Is that something that you'd consider?
Yeah, I suppose one of the advantages I do have is I know every player in Bangladesh, and I know what's expected. I know the levels, I know the facilities, I know how to live out there and adapt. So it's something that I wouldn't dismiss at all. I would struggle with spending 9 or 10 months in one go out there at one time, but again, when you've been in the country for so long, you meet so many nice people, and I know how it all works. And for me, I wouldn't say no in not going back and trying to take a club that can compete with Bashunda Kings and Dhaka Rabbani if it wasn't them, and trying to win the league title away from them.
Well, there you go. On that note, I think we'll leave it there. Jamie, thank you very much. It's been insightful. I've really found it useful, and I know there's a lot of people that are going to be watching the show and are going to be interested in learning what your experiences were in terms of where you're at and going forward. And for those of you that are watching and have watched this, hopefully you've learned a bit more as to the reasons as to where Jamie's at and why he's in the position that he's in right now. And more importantly, if there's any clubs out there, I think you've heard it. I've had the questions on my socials. Would Jamie be interested in joining a club in Bangladesh? Well, he said he would be, so there's your response, right? So Jamie, on behalf of everybody here in the UK and also in Bangladesh, all the football followers and the lovers, I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much. The work you've done has not gone unappreciated, and we wish you all the very best for whatever the future holds for you.
It's a time of my life that I'll look back with very fond memories.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much for everybody who's been watching. That's another edition of The Game Changer. Loved it. Until the next one, I've been Imran Ghazi. You've been watching The Game Changer. See you next time.